I hear a beep that typically means my guest is here, and I'm going to go to my guest. There we are. We are joined with Professor, I should say, I'm sorry, Dr. Um, Hasan Unal. He's Professor of Political Science and International Relations at Başkent University in Ankara, Turkey. Professor, welcome to the show. How you doing this morning? Well, it's this evening for you.
Well, thank you. It's afternoon, but
Yeah.
let's call it morning. Good morning. Yes.
No worries. No worries at all. I always get in trouble
It's
doing that.
it,
It's like
it's
I'm
not.
forcing
Yes,
people into my
nice to be with your
Western.
program. Yes, in your program.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you joining me. I want to jump into Syria because the events that have been taking place in Syria have been just fascinating. And frankly, kind of a geopolitical earthquake in the Middle East. Give me your take on how Syria fell. Let's start there. How did it collapse, especially collapse so quickly? Because I don't think anybody, at least I didn't see it, or anybody that I've spoken to, nobody saw that coming at the speed and rapidity in which it collapsed. From your point of view, why did it collapse so quickly?
Well, other than the general view that Syria had been devastated as a result of the war because of the ruining sanctions by the United States and lots of other problems that the Bashar al-Assad regime actually had to face up to. I have no other explanation because none of us actually following the events down here in Turkey or my friends and colleagues in Russia and Iran. Nobody else. I mean, nobody apparently ever expected the overthrow of the regime. Actually, the regime wasn't overthrown by anybody. It just melted down. And why and how it melted down, I suppose I mean, we are going to have to wait and do research to why and how it quickly melted down as it did. Nobody expected it at such a speed. Indeed, when President Putin actually made an assessment of what happened in Syria, he was basically saying just a few hundred HTS militants basically surrounded one of the biggest cities in Syria, that is Aleppo, and the whole Aleppo with its defenders, okay, surrendered to some 300 people equipped with pickups and light weapons and what have you.
Mhm. Let me ask you this. So Jelani at this point is trying to form a government, and what as he calls it. There are many different groups in Syria that he's now trying to disarm, the Kurds being one of the many groups that are basically there in the territory itself. Do you think he's going to be able to maintain this? I mean, do you think HTS is really going to be able to maintain Syria as a cohesive unit? Or do you expect it to break down? I mean, Israel has taken parts of it. HTS, of course, has taken parts of it. The U.S. Is in parts of it with the Kurdish forces. Do you think this is going to break down, especially along sectarian lines?
Well, it may go, in the direction of unity and disarmament of all those groups and gangs and what have you, and then Syria might actually enjoy some sort of not only unity but also economic development and what have you, or it could go the other way as well, the other way quite easily, in the sense that the society basically, there are lots of groups and peoples who don't trust each other. First of all, who would actually trust an HTS and its leader, who had chopped chopped off lots of heads and tortured people to death, as he was part of Al Qaeda in Iraq, and as he continued, and someone who continued with the same attitude and with the same approach is jihadist, battling jihadist war and all that in Syria. Now he says he's changed on the one hand when he talks to the Turkish officials and others, but at the same time you would see that the people he appoints to his interim cabinet are the same people who applied strict Sharia rules when they were in control of the Idlib province in the northwest of the country, bordering Turkey. So, and if this is what he's going to basically apply to the whole of Syria, it wouldn't augur well, I would say, because under such circumstances, large sections of the Syrian population would certainly resist in various ways, including armed conflicts and whatever, armed resistance. The other thing is, now he recently said that it would take about 3-4 years for the interim government to prepare the constitution and to basically hold the multi-party elections one way or the other. Now, the question is, why would it take so long to prepare a new constitution? After all the Syrians are, more than 90% are Arabs, and a nation state, quite secular, a unitary administration, which is what the Syrian constitution is about, would basically offer the people, all the Syrian people, what they expect. Why would they not simply work on it and then produce a new, having made certain amendments to the constitution, then bringing it up for referendum by the people and all that? And why should it take so long? Because if it is gonna take long, it would then mean that it may actually increase the misgivings across the country among various sections of the people. And there's also the international dimension to that. There's Israel, which is ready to basically stir up trouble in one way or the other. It is already bombed every part of Syria, citing reasons that they were actually bombing the ammunition depots and storage facilities here and there, all the weapons and anything belonging to the Syrian armed forces.
Right.
And the second thing, they have invaded and occupied large chunks of Syrian territory to the south of Syria. According to reports, they are just about 15 to 20 kilometers to the capital, Damascus. Although the new government keeps saying that they are quite friendly and they are going to be friendly to Israel, and they are not going to let anybody use any part of Syrian territory to launch attacks on Syria. They keep saying that. It may reach a point where, even Israel could actually incite ethnic and or religious or sectarian trouble across the country. And then if it takes such a long time to prepare a constitution, then you would expect anything to come out of it. So basically, the situation is fraught with dangers. And how are the other countries going to basically approach to the developing situation in Syria is another question. Whether the United States is going to be helpful to the new administration by lifting the sanctions and offering financial and economic assistance in one way or the other, and the international organizations are going to again come round with financial assistance and what have you, or the other way around, you leave it to its own devices to sort out its own problems. Then you would be talking about a kind of Middle East and Afghanistan, if you like, okay, with neighboring countries taking sides in a new round of civil war that would be quite likely to break out. So, in many respects, I would say that the new situation is not going to be easier for the people of Syria than the previous administration.
How do you make a very good point, where Jelani is making this argument that he wants to reunify Syria, basically now that it's broken, to bring it all back together again. But Israel has been conducting airstrikes on Damascus. I mean, at this point, they're like nearly 1,000 airstrikes that they've done on Syria to destroy any remaining, let's say, armaments that the Syrian government had before it collapsed. How do you explain what seems to be coordination between Israel and between this new Jelani state, or HTS state of Syria? How do you explain the coordination between these two groups? Why doesn't, for whatever reason, he gives them a complete pass? I mean, anytime Israel is brought up, he would say, we're going to have friendly relations, we're going to have friendly relations, despite the fact that Israel has stolen and occupied large parts of Syrian territory, as you pointed out, a few miles from Damascus. How do you explain this coordination between these two groups?
Well, it's difficult to explain it, but as you said, actually, it's a new type of Islamism, if you like, and jihadism. And I would say the biggest loser out of this situation is Iran, and the biggest winner is Israel. Can you imagine? Israel basically was at war with Syria since its establishment in 1948, regardless of whichever government was in power in Damascus. Early on, from its independence in 1946, there were various other governments or governments that came that took over through military coups, until the Ba'ath coup of 1963. But, Syria and Israel fought in 1948, in 1956 as part of the Suez Crisis. No, in 1956, maybe not so much, but certainly 1967, when Israel attacked its neighbors, 3 neighbors, and quadrupled its territories in 6 days. Syria was one of the sufferers. And in 1973, Syria was the main players in the Yom Kippur War, together with Egypt, against Israel. In the first week or so of that war, they pushed Israel out of all the occupied territories. And since then, Syria resisted all the calls for a reconciliation, for peace and reconciliation with Israel, until and unless Israel returns all the Golan Heights and what have you. So Syria always remained on what we call the steadfast countries against Israel, if you like. And now, overnight, if you like, Syria becomes the best friend of Israel, without Israel firing one single bullet. So this is the biggest gain Israel has made, and Iranians have lost enormously. Supposedly Turkey has won, but I would very much doubt that Turkey has ever won. And I would even say that Turkey is going to become, Syria is going to become more and more problematic for Turkey in the weeks and months and possibly years to come.
Well, I'm glad you say that, because Turkey was going to be the next country I went to in this. Because as you point out, a large number of people said that Turkey is won in this, because they said Turkey, the United States, and Israel were both working in coordination with the jihadists in order to accomplish this kind of takeover of the Syrian government. From your point of view, Israel outed, or at the very least said, and I want to get your take on it, that Turkey was working in coordination with Israel and the jihadists as they took over Syria. Do you give any credence to those reports from Israel?
Well, I will take it with a pinch of salt, given that the Turkish government has been very, very critical of Israel at the same time. So Turkey has been one of the most vociferous critiques of Israel's genocide, Israel committing a genocide in Gaza, for instance.
Right.
And the Turkish government has been up and about against Israel here and there. But you can also say at the same time, for instance, about 9 days before this HTS militants went out of their cage, if you like, in Idlib, with the clear intention of capturing Aleppo and all that, the Israeli intelligence chief visited Turkey. So how would you explain that?
Right.
Okay? Yes. Did they simply decide to go over to Ankara for a cup of Turkish tea or a Turkish coffee? Well, certainly not. They discussed lots of things. Plus, I would also say that, for instance, there wasn't much coverage by the Turkish media on that, although the Turkish official press, Anadolu Agency, covered it, but it only gave a coverage about, Turkey and Israel talking about this and that in Hamas-related affairs and a ceasefire in Gaza and what have you. So there may have been some coordination. So if one day a certain degree of convincing evidence comes up pointing to the fact that Turkey and Israel coordinated these efforts, I wouldn't be surprised. But now, without, in the absence of any evidence of that sort, I would say what Turkey did was that Turkey basically offered an enormous gift to Israel on a golden plate. So Turkey basically offered the whole of Syria to Israel in the sense that, Syria is not going to be anti-Israeli anymore.
Right.
So I would say there is this. Okay. So whether you have coordinated it with Israel, with the United States or not, isn't that much important. Plus, I would also say Idlib is so close to Turkey, and these guys basically made Idlib into their terrorist hub in those years, thanks to Turkey. Without Turkey, the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrians would have just crushed them.
Right.
They would have crushed them out of Syria altogether. And they remained there as part of a deal Turkey strenuously and, how shall I say, even to the point of breaking its relations with Russia, with Iranians and others. These guys basically were allowed to remain in Idlib. So there is all this, you can, what I say, supporting evidence that even without the actual coordination of these efforts, Turkey has certainly helped Israel enormously. Whether the Israelis appreciate it or not, there is also that point.
Yeah, well, there's that part too, right? You pointed out that this is not this may not necessarily be good for Turkey in the long run. Why not? Well, why do you think this is not necessarily, this may be to Turkey's detriment in the long run?
Well, first of all, if Syria were to break up through a civil war along religious, sectarian, and also ethnic lines, that would lead to the creation of a puppet state to the east of the Euphrates by the PKK and its affiliates in Syria. And basically, this was something Turkey was more concerned about than anything else in Syria. And now Turkey expects the HTS, for instance, to be tough with these PKK and blah, blah. But HTS, A, cannot do much about that. B, whether Israel and the United States would let HTS do anything against the PKK, PYD to the east of Euphrates is another question. Turkey basically has aggravated its own problem through its own action. And if the country were to break up into pieces, then you would have more refugees coming into Turkey, and Turkey would, meanwhile, presumably spend lots of money. It has already, spent tens of billions of, if not hundreds of billions of dollars on the Syrian war because of its support for the Syrian refugees, because of its loss of trade and economic relations with Syria, because the Syrian war has put so much strains on Turkey's exports to the Middle East, and blah, blah. I mean, prior to the war, Turkey-Syria relations were just excellent, so friendly and almost brotherly. Why did Turkey get involved in this dirty business of the United States and Israel is another question. So what I'm saying is there is a bunch of problems actually that might arise out of the new situation, and the Turkish government would be in a very difficult situation to deal with.
Thank you for that, because a lot of the people who are giving commentary are only looking at it from this angle of, well, this is great for Turkey. Turkey is a major winner in this. And so I do appreciate the perspective that this is not, there are long-term consequences for Turkey that may not necessarily have aired yet, especially considering we don't necessarily know whether the Syrian government is going to be able to maintain itself now or not. That's I definitely appreciate the point of view.
Even in the short term.
Oh, even in the short term, right? Because this is fluid, and we don't know how this is going to turn out. I want to move to Gaza for a bit. Where does that stand currently? I mean, because it seems like with the collapse of Syria, Gaza has been isolated, that much more so. For that matter, Gaza and the West Bank seems to have been isolated, with Israel at this point seemingly can do whatever it wants without any pushback from the rest of the world, especially now that this kind of the Hezbollah Syria axis has been crushed. Give me a take on where Gaza stands currently, or for that matter, even the West Bank.
Well, I don't really know what I would say positively in favor, that anything would actually impact positively on Gaza and the West Bank.
Right.
The other thing is, as I said, Iran is the biggest loser in Syria. And because Syria was always the link between Iran and Hezbollah. Hezbollah is presumably the only military organization that actually defied Israel and forced Israel to retreat in every battle it was involved in. In 2006, it was like that. Previously, Hezbollah had always basically forced Israel to retreat after it attacked Hezbollah. Hezbollah won the latest war in October, November. To my understanding, Hezbollah basically didn't let Israel invade and occupy 1 inch of Lebanese territory. There's no question about that. And for the first time, Hezbollah managed to basically bomb every part of Israel, including capital Tel Aviv, with its stocks of missiles and what have you. So, but this certainly a big blow in two senses. One is that logistically, it is going to be quite. It is not going to be as easy in the past for Iran to supply Hezbollah. This is one thing. And the second thing is the government in Damascus. Now, the government in Damascus says that they have no animosity to Israel, to the United States, to any Western country, or to any country in the region except Iran and Hezbollah, they say. And they are going to crush Hezbollah, or they are going to help crush Hezbollah with whatever means at their disposal. So it is going to. So Hezbollah and Iran will have to formulate new ways of, not only communication but also logistical supply and what have you. But at the same time, this axis of resistance. Now, in the past, for instance, we didn't have this Ansarullah as part of this axis of resistance. Now we have that in the Yemen, and it's a very interesting phenomenon because they have all sorts of missile stocks with which they can hit Israel, and not only Israel, but they are basically defying the United States and the Western Armada in the Red Sea. Interestingly. So there's all that. So we are going to wait to see how this situation basically reshapes itself. So it's not going to. I mean, Hezbollah will have to find a way of survival. Otherwise, I mean, I wouldn't expect Hezbollah to be crushed so easily. The other thing is. To what degree would Israel meddle in the internal affairs of Syria? To the degree of inciting a civil war? And if they do, what would be the ultimate aim of Israel, for instance, and or the United States? So these are all the questions basically we'll have to wait to try to answer.
No, I agree with you. It's complicated. I mean, the situation was already complicated. It's gotten that much more fraught and complicated, especially for the regional players. There seems to be, whether it's Iraq, Iran, Russia, Turkey, all of these groups are seeming to try to get influence into the new Syrian government. How do you think that looks so far? Meaning, I've seen Iraq go and have these conversations with the Syrian government. I've seen Turkey send its foreign minister into Syria. All of these groups are trying to, I guess, gain favor and influence. How do you think that's going to work out? Meaning, which group do you think is going to get the most, let's say, dominant influence in the country up to this point? I mean, that's assuming the country can even stay together.
Well, it also depends on how Trump administration is going to approach Syria. Whether the Trump administration, as Trump has profusely expressed over the last few weeks and so forth, it is going to follow a policy of, I don't have much business in Syria, and
Right.
okay, Assad was a bad guy. Now with him gone, it doesn't mean that we are going to get more involved. If this is going to be the U.S. policy, then the whole thing, the whole Syria business, would then be left to Israel to deal with on the part of the Western world. And that is where Israel, it may be easier for Israel and also at the same time difficult for Israel, because after all, as there is no threat perception coming from Syria, for instance, why would you basically try to tear up Syria into pieces, or why would you incite civil wars here and there, or what would you do with it?
Yeah.
You know, so it's going to be an interesting situation to watch. On the Turkish part, again, something similar. What Turkey now expects is that the Gulf Arab countries are going to pour money into Syria for reconstruction and what have you. They are talking about $300 billion as the minimum. Some estimates go up to $600 billion. And some others say even $1 trillion is needed to basically put the country back into some sort of shape. So what Turkey expects, and the present, the incumbent government in Turkey expects, is that there's going to be lots of money poured into Syria, and the Turkish companies are going to go into all these government proper projects to build new airports, to build new blah blah infrastructure and what have you. The Turkish companies are quite good at that. So, but if nobody basically pours in so much money into Syria, then Syria will become a wasteland, which nobody would take any lively interest in. Remember the days the United States was actually pulling out of Afghanistan. There was all this speculation about who is going to gain much influence in Afghanistan, whether it is going to be China or Russia or the United States is going to come back one way or the other through the back door.
Right.
Afghanistan is basically a wasteland now. No one is taking much interest in. So Syria is not going to be perhaps that bad. We never know. But there doesn't appear to be much hope either. I mean, there doesn't appear to be any concrete, how shall I say, hope. That we can say, okay, so there's going to be restructure and there's going to be money coming from Gulf Arab countries, from the United States, from European countries. All of them are going to. Now we have a guy who says who is changed, and who doesn't shake hands with the German foreign minister because she's a woman.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I mean, the woman is taken mickey off. Because she says she tries to say still nice things despite all this, and even the German media basically are making a mickey out of all that and saying, "Look, what are you talking about? He hasn't shaken your hand because you are a woman."
I know, right? If you can't even shake the woman's hand, what does it mean for the women in your government? And I guess that means they're not going to be women.
Apparently, when they went into the meeting, they talked about women's rights and blah blah extensively.
Right in the household.
Women's rights were all over the place in Syria under the Ba'ath administration. It was quite secular, although there was Islamic law in addition to the secular law in Syria before. In terms of secularization of the country, it was much ahead of any other Arab country, perhaps on a par with Egypt.
Right. Well, speaking about Egypt, so Channel 4 has given this kind of, I guess, interview where Netanyahu is saying that Egypt is breaking some kind of peace treaty with Israel because they are militarizing their own territory, effectively saying Egypt doesn't have a right to defend itself. And because it's concerned about, I guess, jihadists invading Egypt, Egypt is starting building up defenses in its own territory. And Netanyahu is saying, well, that is threatening to us that they're doing this in their own territory. Have you been surprised that many of the Arab states have allowed Israel to kill as many Arabs and Muslims as they have? I mean, they've committed a genocide against the Palestinians. They've slaughtered many of the Lebanese in these bombing strikes, in these airstrikes. And as you pointed out, with the Syrian government, they're a few miles from Damascus, putting just astonishing bombing rates in the tunes of 500 or more at this point. None of the Arab states have did anything. Many have said something that they didn't particularly like, but none of them have done anything. They've just allowed Israel to go about in the way that they have. Has that surprised you? Because I got to be honest, it surprised me that nobody got involved.
Well, it is difficult to say in the sense because this, Muslim Brotherhood business divided the Arab world. So if you basically talk to the Egyptians, they say with justice, Muslim Hamas is the Palestinian equivalent of the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood is against all the secular governments across the Arab world. It is also the Gulf Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates would say, well, they are also against the Gulf monarchies. Okay, so they don't basically trust them. There is no trust between them. There is obvious enmity and blah blah. And the Syrian civil war again divided the Arab countries up to a certain point. But the trouble is, over the last few years, the Gulf Arab countries, for instance, poured so much money into this dirty war to topple Bashar Assad and the Ba'ath administration over that. But then they backtrailed from their position, realizing that what is going to come in its place is going to be a jihadist administration of support, and therefore they basically reshaped their policy by which they embraced Syria into the ranks of Arab League and what have you. But then again, when Bashar Assad, he wasn't overthrown. I wouldn't like to use the word, but when he escaped the country, the trouble is none of them could have done anything because it happened just overnight. No one expected it. And now, presumably, they are trying to come up to terms with the newly developing situation. So the Turkish side says, these guys have changed, if you believe that story, okay? Saudi Arabia would have to buy that story, at least initially now. You give these guys some sort of, how shall I say, advice and support so that they wouldn't go to the extremes. And from the Saudi point of view, for instance, it wouldn't be bad if they were so anti-Iranian, okay? Because to be anti-Iranian would automatically mean to be Saudi friendly. So in the case of the Egyptians and the others, again, there are all these divides. On the one hand, Egypt is dead against the Muslim Brotherhood and all that. And these guys are, on the one hand, radical Islamists. On the other hand, they're not anti-Israeli. So it's a very complicated situation. When you have all these complications, you would understand why the Arab countries haven't raised their finger when Israel was committing a genocide against the Gazan people. The other thing might well be the Egyptians and the others I've spoken to say that no one expected that Israel would go to those extremes. So this, I mean, how would, in this day and age, a country like even Israel wouldn't go to those extremists? They never expected this. There's all this problem around, and I think everyone is expecting, everyone is waiting for Trump to come up and, formulate his own policy,
Yeah.
Middle East in general, and also to the specific questions like a Palestinian state. What sort of a Palestinian state? Would you basically pacify the situation in West Bank and one way or the other by giving the Palestinians a state? Okay, and also the other Arab countries, for instance, what sort of a policy would the United States, for instance, pursue with regard to Syria? Turkey is very much expecting that to come out, because from the Turkish point of view, there is this PKK BYD business to the side, to the east of the Euphrates, and if nothing comes along, and if the United States continues to back these terrorist groups in that part of Syria, like under the Biden administration, then Turkey will have to undertake some military operations that might actually strain the Turkish-American relations, but then the Turkish public would condone it. So there are all these questions hanging around. We are going to have to wait to see how those questions are going to be resolved.
Do you think Trump is going to abandon the Kurds in this situation? Because you're right, from the Turkish point of view, the PKK and the YPG are terrorist groups that the United States effectively back in Syria. But HTS has said that they want to make Syria whole, and HTS has shown, let's say, antagonism towards the Kurdish groups. I mean, they've been continuous fighting with those groups. What do you think Trump's policy towards the Kurds are going to be? I mean, Trump has said that he wants to pull out of Syria. By definition, that would mean effectively pulling out military assets that are defending the Kurdish regions. How do you think that's going to unfold? Do you think Trump is going to ultimately pull out?
Well, normally, in normal circumstances, I would expect him to pull out. But there is this Israeli dimension to that. The problem is, if I was the United States and or Israel, I would never try to carve out a Kurdish state of the Middle East, because this would turn Turkey automatically against you. Why would you, how shall I say, why would you turn a friendly country like Turkey with 85 million population, with quite a big economy and quite a lot of influence, with, essentially effective military and what have you against you? This doesn't make sense. Okay, so you can't do that, and one day or the other, and one way or the other, it is going to happen, and your relations with Turkey is going to be harmed as a result of this policy. But there are certain groups in the United States that want that, and that I don't understand. Why? Deep state groups, certain lobbyists who want to be on unfriendly terms with Turkey. But then the trouble is, okay, if you do that, then in a multipolar world, first, you are not going to be able to carve out a Kurdish state of the territories of 4 Middle Eastern countries. You are going to push Turkey and Iran together one way or the other, and essentially Iraqi government, even the Barzani administration in the north of Turkey, because they are also concerned about rising influence of the PKK, PYD in the region. So, I mean, if Trump as he said in his first administration, says again, pull out of Syria. We have no proper interest there, and leave it whatever. He will be doing the right thing. But at the time, the neocons and others prevented him. Even one diplomat posted after he lost the elections, remember, that they actually cheated the president by saying, okay, Mr. President, we are acting upon your instruction. We are pulling out of Syria. But then they showed him certain maps and they gave him certain figures, blah, blah, but they cheated the president. If Trump is going to allow himself to be cheated again, I don't know. But in a multipolar world order, even the deep state elements in the United States will have to understand that there is a limit to which they can play about with Turkey.
One last question before I let you go. Iran, as you pointed out, Iran is probably the biggest loser in this, well, beyond the Syrian people, and especially the minority communities like the Alawites, Christians, etc. Israel seems to be gearing up for, at the very least, threatening to attack Iran now that Syria and the air defense of Syria is no longer an issue. Do you think this is going to take place? Do you see this unfolding? I mean, the people I've spoken to from Iran have said that Iran is coming up with a new formulation to deal with what they expect to be a pressure campaign from the United States, with potential military action coming from Syria and maybe even the US. Do you expect this to take place? What are your thoughts?
Well, it again depends on the policy of Trump administration. Israel cannot actually face up to Iran on its own. I think Israel is a bit too, how shall I say, it seems to be acting as if it can do anything.
Right.
It is not that powerful. For instance, in the case of its, whatever you call skirmishes with Iran, if you like, by which the Iranians sent in missiles and drones into the Israeli territories. For the first time, Israeli territories basically experienced that, the Israeli population. So if Israel were to mess up with Iran to the point of attacking Iran on a full scale, that would result in, that would result in consequences for Israel on a major scale. But if Israel were to be backed up by the United States, what I think the ideal scenario Israel wants is the United States attacks Iran, and Israel would take part in the attack alongside the United States. But then the problem is, Iran is not going to be an easy target. It would actually present a formidable target for the United States. So it's not going to be an easy job, even for the United States, with its hypersonic missiles. And the Iranians may have even made some nuclear bombs. They may have made some of the bombs. They may, even if they may not, even if they haven't tested them, and that is also questionable. But what I'm saying, so Iran would be a formidable enemy even for the United States to take on. And if Israel tries to do the job on its own, then it would lead to very difficult scenario across the Middle East, because the United States could not leave Israel to its own, on its own in a very difficult situation. So I think it all depends. And in the case of the Trump administration formulating its policy towards Iran, then you have these two points. On the one hand, Trump doesn't want any wars. He wants to end all the wars. He wants to get the United States out of war zones. because he doesn't want to spend waste United States money in those senseless wars. I mean, to my view, he's quite right in saying all this. And on the other hand, there's a very powerful Israeli lobby, and that Israeli lobby is quite hand in glove with the Trump administration.
Yeah.
How these things are going to basically play out full force, again, it is going to be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one either. I don't know how that's going to work. That seems like a contradiction in terms.
Yeah.
Professor, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. God, I got to get one last question. Relationship between Iran and Turkey, and for that matter, Russia and Turkey. Can you give me a few words on those, and that'll close it?
Well, the Iranians are quite frustrated with Turkey and the role Turkey played in overthrowing Assad.
Put it mildly.
In the way they did. The other thing, the Russians may be equally frustrated, but the Russians don't give vent to their frustration because they know they need Turkey on a variety of issues, involving large amount of trade between the two countries, even nuclear cooperation for a nuclear reactor they are building. Plus, can you imagine the help and assistance Turkey has actually offered to Russia in this war?
Right.
Why not joining in the anti-Russian sanctions? Why not? Would you imagine if Turkey had been part of the war, like Poland, for instance, and opened up the whole of the Black Sea, all these fronts against Russia, the whole of Russia would have been vulnerable. So, and the Russians do appreciate that. At the same time, they are, I'm sure, quite frustrated with Turkey over Syria, but they don't say anything about that.
Right.
Instead, they just criticize Assad as everyone else does.
Yeah. Professor, man, thank you for this. Professor, or I should say Dr. Hasan Unal, he's professor of political science and international relations at Bashkent University in Ankara, Turkey. Thank you for this, man. Really informative. I really do appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
That's my pleasure.
All right. Great conversation.